Right, so Israel, throughout the last several months, has made much of its right to defend itself. Every time innocent civilians have been caught up in Israeli assaults on Gaza, it's always come back to excuses about Israel's right to defend itself. It's always the response, no matter the casualty rate, and now as they intensify attacks outside of Gaza, in Lebanon and Syria particularly, that excuse is wearing thinner than Donald Trump's skin in a courtroom. Every single attack, it seems to be the go-to response. But an attack in Lebanon that happened only shortly before I sat down to start planning today's content might just now blow apart that pathetic excuse, as 4 members of the UN have been injured in an Israeli strike in southern Lebanon. Because if this was Israel, in what way is Israel defending itself by attacking the UN? Or are they going to make the not completely beyond the realms of possibility excuse that these people were working for Hamas or Hezbollah? Because even that wouldn't be a first. Right, so somewhat breaking news this morning, at time of writing, that 3 United Nations officials and their translator have been injured as a shell exploded near them along the Israeli-Lebanese border in the village of Ramesh. Now, these UN officials were members of UNIFIL, the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, and they are a UN peacekeeping force that monitors that border and has been doing so for the last 46 years now, since 1978, since tensions really began actually between Israel and Lebanon, one of the most peaceful of Israel's borders there, as that has been historically, until that was when Israel decided to back separatists during the civil war in Lebanon during the 70s and 80s, which later gave rise to Hezbollah. So Lebanon very much an enemy of Israel's own making, and indeed no diplomatic relations exist between the two nations. So the UN patrol the border. They monitor it, they evidence any aggressive activity, let's call it. In that vein, and given what early days it is right now, we don't actually know where the shell came from that's struck nearby this UNIFIL unit. But given that Ramesh is in Lebanon and that Hezbollah armaments are significantly better than those Hamas cobbled together, not to mention the fact Israel have far more recent history of attacks on the UN than Lebanon does, circumstantially at least, the finger of blame certainly is being pointed in Israel's direction right now, though they are denying it. We know, after all, that Israel have heavily targeted another UN agency, after all, don't we? UNRWA, accusing them of employing Hamas operatives, made up a pack of unevidenced lies as it remains, seen as, since the evidence they claim to have they have never unveiled, which resulted in many countries later restoring financing to UNRWA. They're not the US, notably, who have decided to end funding until 2025, because they're just that stupid, presumably. Now, the work of UNIFIL since the end of the 2006 Lebanon War, which was the last time Lebanon and Israel were formally at war with each other, UNIFIL's duties were enhanced to include ongoing monitoring of the cessation of those hostilities, accompanying the Lebanese armed forces on their patrols, and deal with humanitarian assistance to anyone displaced at the border. So it really doesn't make an awful lot of sense for Lebanon to be the culprit here. It is not a small UN agency either. It employs 10,000 peacekeepers from 46 nations. Its mandate is renewed annually each September by the UN Security Council and has an annual budget close to $500 million. All that to patrol southern Lebanon along the Israel border. There's a large party that thinks, especially right now, that perhaps if the UN dealt with Israel's aggression in some sort of more meaningful way, you wouldn't need to spend so much money and so much in the way of resources patrolling a border with them. But equally, it tells me that there is also little incentive here for Lebanon or their Hezbollah government to attack UNIFIL either, when they've been working together for decades. Well, as I said, Israel are denying it was them, at this moment in time anyway. But this is actually the third such strike against UNIFIL since the events of October 7th. Back on the 28th of October, Hezbollah claimed to have shot down an Israeli drone. A UNIFIL peacekeeper was injured again in a shell attack, and it can't be coincidence that tensions on the Israeli-Lebanese border have increased seemingly in tangent with the Israeli invasion of Gaza. Hezbollah and Hamas, both arguably creations of Israel, a response to Israeli aggression both in their occupation of Gaza and their warfare with Lebanon. They have ties and common bonds with each other as a result, so it's no stretch to imagine Israel, having decided to go into Gaza as they have, may have decided to preemptively have a go at Lebanon at the same time as a warning perhaps at that point to just not get involved. In keeping with that thinking, the other event, which was earlier on the 15th of October, so that's just a week after the events of October 7th, the UNIFIL headquarters in Naqoura in southern Lebanon was subject to a rocket attack. Fortunately, again, nobody was injured then either, so were these all just warning shots? Well, this latest attack makes for 3 border attacks now, and well, see if you can think of a single reason why Lebanon would be the aggressor here after all I've said so far, because I'm struggling. I can't see the sense in it. But as already pointed out, I can see how Israel would want Lebanon to butt out of matters pertaining to Gaza, and obviously these strikes have instead provoked, not just in Lebanon, but Syria as well. And of course, who can forget what the Houthis in Yemen are doing too? And in keeping with my theorising in a video from yesterday, where I felt Israel were provoking further military responses from nations like Lebanon and Syria in order to provoke retaliation that would allow them to play the victim card again and secure more in the way of weapons and armaments, not that that's troubled them suddenly as the US have just coughed up billions of dollars worth more to them. A Hezbollah drone attack last month saw Israel retaliate in self-defence as the IDF targeted Lebanese weapons depots again in the south of the country. No mention, of course, that Israel had in January killed a Hezbollah leader in an airstrike though. Functionally, Israel has been warring again with Lebanon ever since October 7th too then. It just doesn't get quite the same press attention, but for anyone saying this was all about Hamas after October 7th, the attacks on Lebanon ought to make such claims dry up, because Hezbollah didn't do anything on October 7th after all. Anyway, here's an excerpt from Al Jazeera's coverage, who have been amongst the first to report on this. Reporting from Beirut, Al Jazeera's Zaina Koder said the UN observers and translator were close to the blue line, the border between Lebanon and Israel, on foot patrol when the explosion took place. The incident was another dangerous development in a simmering conflict, which is now at its 6th month between Israel and Hezbollah, she said. Israel's shelling of Lebanon has killed nearly 270 Hezbollah fighters, but it has also killed about 50 civilians, including children, medics and journalists, and hit both UNIFIL and the Lebanese army. In November, UNIFIL said one of its patrols was targeted by Israeli gunfire in southern Lebanon, but there were no casualties. UNIFIL last month said the Israeli military violated international law by firing on a group of clearly identifiable journalists, killing a Reuters journalist. Now, Al Jazeera have reported on more incidents than I had come across in my research in this story. Another attack in November that they mentioned there, and the killing of a Reuters journalist along that Lebanese border. And sometimes I get a bit of criticism for using these foreign media outlets, and I have to say to these people, well, why should I not use them? They are there. They're local to that area. They've got journalists on the ground across the Middle East, in the case of Al Jazeera, certainly. And not only that, they're reporting on what is relevant too. Thus far, at time of writing at any rate, one of the few UK outlets to be reporting on this breaking story as it has been The Guardian, who in their immediate coverage have reported nothing said by Lebanon. They've just covered Israel's denial as if that is all that matters. But our media is that rubbish. Why would I ever want to cite them first in matters like this, especially when it pertains to Israel? Any Lebanese retaliation in response to this attack before the shell is confirmed to be Israeli, or not, as the case may be, would be a bad idea, because it would just give Israel yet more opportunity to cry victim, and they really want their victim status back now. So many people across the world view them as a pariah state instead now, and striking too early with so many loyal media outlets globally waiting to support Israel. Well, you wouldn't want to help them with that, would you? The details of this ploy covered in this video recommendation of mine here. My humble suggestion for a watch next if you haven't already. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.